Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, everything.
We've got corporate giants like NVIDIA, Google, Starbucks, central banks making big decisions, international tensions, a lot to unpack.
So let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into the corporate world, starting with NVIDIA. They seem to be doing really well, lots of demand, but then this thing they call Q4 guidance came out,
Yeah.
and it kind of spooked people.
Yeah, Q4 guidance is basically NVIDIA's prediction of how much they think they'll grow in the next few months, and it wasn't as high as everyone expected.
So is that bad?
Uh,
I mean, should I be worried?
Well, it's definitely something to watch. NVIDIA is a major player in the tech industry, so if their growth is slowing down, it could be a sign that the whole tech sector is cooling off.
So it's like a canary in the coal mine for the tech world.
Exactly. And speaking of canaries, Google might be facing a major shakeup. The Department of Justice is considering forcing them to break up.
Break up, like split the company into pieces.
Potentially, yeah. They could be forced to separate products like Chrome and Android from the main company. It's a big deal.
Wow, that would be huge. I mean, I use Google for everything. Search, maps, email. What would that even look like?
It's hard to say for sure, but it could have a massive impact on how we use the internet. Imagine if using Chrome meant you could only access other Google services. Or if Android apps suddenly didn't work as well with other companies' products.
Okay, now I'm getting a little nervous. And on the topic of big changes, Starbucks is thinking about selling its stake in China. What's going on there?
It's an interesting move. Could be that they're not as confident in the Chinese market anymore. Or maybe they're just shifting their strategy.
I guess when you're as big as Starbucks, every move you make sends shockwaves.
Exactly. And while Starbucks might be pulling back, another company, Snowflake, is diving headfirst into the world of AI. They're partnering up with a firm called Anthropic.
AI is everywhere these days, but what makes this partnership special?
Well, Anthropic is a big name in AI, so this shows that Snowflake is serious about being a leader in this rapidly growing area.
So they're basically putting all their chips on AI.
Pretty much. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with. Now, not every tech company is riding the AI wave quite as confidently. Apple, for instance, saw its sales dip in China during their big Singles Day shopping event.
Singles Day, is that like their Black Friday?
Yeah, it's a huge shopping day in China, and Apple didn't do as well as they usually do.
Uh-oh, does that mean the Apple empire is crumbling?
It's too early to say for sure, but it's something to keep an eye on. Apple faces a lot more competition in China than they used to.
It's like a constant battle, these companies trying to stay on top. And speaking of battles, Boeing is still dealing with the fallout from those tragic plane crashes. They've even admitted to having some serious problems with their company culture.
It's a tough situation. They've got a long road ahead of them. It's not just about fixing technical issues, it's about rebuilding trust with their employees, their customers, and the public.
It's a good reminder that even the biggest companies aren't invincible. Now, let's look at two companies taking very different approaches to growth. Unilever decided to keep its ice cream brands, spinning them off into a separate company. But Novartis is doubling down on its pharmaceutical business.
It just shows you there's no one-size-fits-all approach to success in the business world.
It's like they're going in opposite directions. And then you've got the Adani Group, facing some serious bribery allegations in the U.S. What happens when a company that big gets hit with something like that?
Bribery charges are never a good look, especially for a company as influential as Adani. It could damage their reputation, lead to huge fines, and even affect their ability to do business internationally.
Wow, that's a lot to deal with. It makes you realize the impact these companies have, not just on their own businesses, but on the global economy as a whole. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about central banks, because things are getting pretty interesting there too. The Federal Reserve, which controls interest rates in the U.S., is sending mixed signals about whether they'll be cutting rates again.
Yeah, the Fed is walking a tightrope right now. They're trying to keep inflation under control while also supporting economic growth. Some officials want to cut rates to boost the economy, but others are worried about inflation getting out of hand.
So it's a tough call.
Yeah.
But what does this mean for regular people like me? Why should I care about interest rates?
Well, interest rates affect everything from how much you pay for a mortgage to the return you get on your savings account. They have a ripple effect throughout the economy.
So they're kind of a big deal. And while the Fed is grappling with interest rates, the Bank of Japan is laser-focused on exchange rates.
Right. They're really concerned about how fluctuations in the value of the Japanese yen are affecting their economy.
Okay, I'll admit, exchange rates are a bit of a mystery to me. Can you break it down? Why does it matter so much to Japan?
Well, think of it this way. If the Japanese yen is strong, it means their products become more expensive for buyers in other countries. And Japan relies heavily on exports, so that can hurt their economy.
Ah, that makes sense. So what happens in Japan doesn't stay in Japan. It affects all of us.
Exactly. And speaking of central banks, the European Central Bank is also hinting at more rate cuts. It seems like they're facing similar challenges to the Fed: sluggish growth, fears of inflation. It's a global trend.
It's like all the central banks are in the same boat, trying to navigate these choppy economic waters.
Yeah, pretty much. But before we get too lost in the world of economics, let's turn our attention to the geopolitical arena. Because things are pretty tense out there. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, for example, has taken a concerning turn with Russia test firing an ICBM.
An ICBM. That sounds serious.
It is. An ICBM is an intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of traveling vast distances. It's a major escalation of tensions. And with the U.S. announcing plans to cancel Ukraine's debt and China unveiling measures to boost its foreign trade, well, it's hard not to see those as connected events.
Like a global game of chess, with each move having consequences.
Exactly. And then you have the situation in Gaza, where the U.S. has just vetoed a UN resolution for a ceasefire. It's a complex web of alliances and conflicts, with the stakes getting higher by the day.
It's a lot to keep track of. So with all this uncertainty, how are the markets reacting?
Well, the stock market rally we saw recently seems to be losing steam. Investors are getting nervous about things like tariffs and the possibility of a global economic slowdown. Even though Goldman Sachs is predicting stability in the bond market, there's a general feeling of unease in the air.
So it sounds like investors are holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next. And speaking of uncertainty, there's quite a bit happening in the Trump administration as well. President Trump is still searching for a new Treasury Secretary, but he's chosen Russ Vought to lead the Office of Management and Budget.
Yes, and the Treasury Secretary is a key player in economic policy, so this will be an important appointment to watch. The OMB, on the other hand, is responsible for the federal budget and government spending.
Right. And of course, it wouldn't be Washington without a bit of drama, right? There are already some ethics concerns swirling around one of this potential Treasury Secretary candidate, something about business ties to China. How might that impact the U.S.-China relationship, which is already pretty strained?
It's definitely something to watch. These kinds of concerns could complicate negotiations on trade and other issues, adding another layer of tension to an already delicate relationship. And adding fuel to the fire, the House Ethics Committee is blocking the release of a report on Congressman Matt Gaetz.
It seems like there's always something brewing in the world of politics. And speaking of interesting appointments, President Trump is also likely to choose a surgeon and writer to head the FDA.
That's an unconventional choice for sure. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But let's zoom out for a minute and look at the global economic picture. What are some of the key indicators telling us?
Well, U.S. ports are seeing record import volumes. And that's happening right before those expected tariff hikes kick in. What does that tell us?
It could be a sign that businesses are stockpiling goods before those tariffs drive up prices. They're trying to get ahead of the curve.
Smart move. But what about China? Are they feeling the pressure from these trade tensions?
Well, government advisors in China are suggesting a 5% growth target for 2025.
That's pretty ambitious, considering all the uncertainty in the global economy. Do you think they can pull it off?
It'll be a challenge, that's for sure. But there are also some positive signs coming out of Asia. Taiwan's exports, for example, are exceeding expectations, driven by strong demand for AI technology.
So Taiwan is becoming a major player in the tech world.
They're definitely one to watch. And Japan is preparing a massive stimulus package to boost its economy.
Sounds like they're going all in. What about South Korea? Any good news from there?
South Korea's exports are finally starting to grow again after a period of decline, so that's a positive sign.
Well, that's a bit of good news amidst all the uncertainty. We've covered a lot of ground today. It's enough to make your head spin.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. But it's important to understand how all these seemingly disparate events are connected, how they impact our lives, even if we don't always realize it.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so fascinating. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, and we'll be diving deeper into some of these topics in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned for that.
Phew. It's like we just did a whirlwind tour of the entire world, from corporate giants to central banks, and even touching on some pretty serious geopolitical stuff.
Yeah, my head is definitely spinning a bit. But it's fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together, even if some of those pieces are a little bit scary.